In this breakdown, we're going to go through the product menu, explain what the functions are and their purpose. So starting under product, we first come to search by item, and this is a basic item search form. You have the option to search by the item identifier or the SKU number, a selling part number or interchange part number, and then additional filters for life cycle and ACES part terminology. At present, note that the initial identifier field is not a case-sensitive search, and hyphens and spaces are not considered, whereas for a selling part number or an interchange number, those spaces, hyphens, and case sensitivity does matter. On this form, if you click Search, you come up with the most recently created items in your catalog. And anytime you come up with a search result where you see undefined as the selling part number here, pay special attention to that and make sure that's purposeful, because an item will not be included in an ACES or PIES file if it does not have a selling part number defined. From here, we can click on the part number and go to the item's product profile page, or we can click under the actions. The I goes to the kind of product information page. The wrench goes to ACES setup, and the gear goes to the ACES applications. Further, you can filter on this page if you wanted to reduce the values that have been returned already in the search results. The next option is search by kit component. So if you are selling kits, you have the ability to find what the components are within that kit. It can be a little tricky to figure out if you're changing a kit or where those are applied, so the kit component search allows you to do that. Simply put in a partial value for whatever that kit component part number should be, and you'll see all of the kit components that match that string and the item that they are included in, as well as some other information about the component that is listed there. The next item in our menu is create an item. There's a couple different ways to create an item. I would suggest copying an existing item first, but if you do want to start at the very beginning, create an item is where you go. First, it asks for the identifier, SKU, part number, a couple different terms that are used out there, but that is the master identifier that you will have for this item. The internal note is simply a value that you can use as a reference back to some kind of source information. And then supplier part number if you are in a situation where you are loading data from another data provider and you want to associate their part number with yours, the supplier number gives you a path to do that. So again, if you are receiving data from somebody else and they cannot provide the data with your part number in it, they have to use theirs, this provides a relationship between those two when you're updating the data from that supplier. But completing the form and clicking Save takes you to that item, and then you can continue to populate it from there. It will create a base profile definition, base selling profile with your data in there, but you have to complete everything else with that item. Product data coverage is one of the product metric pages that we see. At a high level, we can see how many items are in your catalog, when they were created, some high-level metrics in terms of coverage down here. Product data health is a similar view. Both of these pages are going to continue to be flushed out as we have the ability to focus on them, but this shows related elements that link to the standards, such as part terminologies and PADB relationships, things of that nature, linking back to the standards themselves. So if they make a change, this is kind of the health check from a PIES standpoint to see if you're using brand IDs or other values that are no longer valid. Following the product data health, we have the digital asset page. This is where you build your digital asset library for images or brochures or PDFs that need to be associated with either items directly or applications. We start out on an item or asset search page where we can search by a file name, asset type, file type orientation, or an updated since. So if you want to look at everything that you've loaded today, simply click on that field. It'll default to the current day and go ahead and say search. To add additional assets to your library, simply click this add option over here on the right. And the load form allows you to drag multiple files up to 50 at a time onto this page. I can drag the files. I could put in a series of URLs and a separated list here. and load them that way. I would load the URLs and click Gather Assets, and I would see previews down here. But in this case, I'm just dragging the images over. Again, up to 50. It is a web upload, so if you're trying to load a lot of large files, please be patient with that, or use our FTP process instead to load those images. But when you do use the web form, you have some additional options. We can set a default asset type and orientation, so I can look at this image and say this might be a front image or primary. I can change whatever I want that default value to be. Then I also have the ability to auto-associate this to a product. Looking at this file, we can assume that LS10105 is a part number and -3 indicates a view or orientation of some kind. So if I want to auto-associate this to an item, I simply click the box and say I want to delimit the file name by the hyphen. So if my part number was LS10105 and I had these values set, when I submit these files and load it up, it will try to associate these images with those items. It won't always work. You may use different file names, may have multiple delimiting characters, some other things in there that may not work, but that's a shortcut for anyone that is using that kind of a relationship with their items. But after I clicked submit, you saw a green bar that went across the screen. If for some reason, as things are going over the internet, something kind of gets stuck and you have a green bar that's stuck out here for too long, just click submit again. It'll pick up from where it was and move on from there. But I can scroll down and confirm also that all of these show uploaded asset done to show it was completed, and I can move on. From there, I'd click the back or cancel button here. It goes back to my search window, and if I was to search images from today, I'd then see the images that I had. Quick note on the images once they're loaded. We do try to create a thumbnail of every image that has been loaded, but that can be a challenge as different compression types and file types are used. So in some cases you may see an icon representing that we are still going through that conversion process, or it's a PDF or some other kind of file that we cannot generate a thumbnail from, but we do try and generate that. So be patient. If you see the processing icon, give that some time to complete. If you're still not seeing the thumbnail come up, you can try and reload it or reach out to us and we'll figure out why that image may not be completing processing. From here, I can click on the edit icon and adjust the asset type, orientation, and other metadata that goes along with that item. We do try to automatically generate some other metadata values like the height and width for each asset. We can click on View Associations, and we would see any items or applications that are associated with this item. And I can also use the Add link up here to create relationships between the asset and items directly. I also have the ability at the bottom of this initial page to view the original source file. If you want to download the source and not a thumbnail or something else that we've converted, that is an option on the bottom of that page. The last element in the product menu is a submenu called Product Resources. Product Resources is where you're going to establish some definitions that are used throughout the rest of your PI's product definitions. They include interchange targets, pricing targets, product attribute definitions, custom element definitions, and hazardous material profiles. Starting with interchange targets, you no longer have to enter in a manufacturer name and brand ID with each interchange. To improve consistency in the way that data is authored, you're defining that value once, and then you reference that when you're creating an interchange for an item. So you only need to research and define a brand ID one time. You can make sure that manufacturer names are put in a consistent way. And other values such as quality grade level and interchange type codes are also going to be consistent as you move forward. On this page, we'll see the Evokat name, brand, and also an internal only value. There are a couple elements within Premier where you can have an internal only value. For whatever reason, if you do not want one of these interchanges to go out in your PI's files, you simply say that this is an internal only value. There is no other logic to determine that user-defined interchanges or anything else should be kept within the system. You have to flag that as internal only going forward. Defining a new interchange target, we again look to the top right of that section. New interchange target asks for a brand code, which does a search against the AAIA brand table. Simply choose the desired brand, and then you can put in your own Evokat display name and public display name. So if you don't like the brand name that comes about, you can author to your own name within the system and still distribute that information with a different name when it goes out. It's rare with interchanges, but there are some occasions where internally you want to have a different reference than externally. So this gives you that ability. Another option from the interchange target page is a move function. If for some reason you've accidentally created two interchanges that really should be consolidated together, you can use this move function and reclassify all interchanges in the system that were using that previous interchange target to use the new desired value. The next element in the product resources menu are pricing targets. Pricing targets provide an additional level of security around your product pricing. The only way prices are included in a PIES file or any other report is if you explicitly request those prices to be included. So a target name can be a particular retailer, can be a distribution channel, a couple of different things, but you would group whatever set of prices you want, retail, list, any other price type, within that pricing target. And then when you generate a PIES file, you'd say you want all the prices that are listed under, in this case, the master target name, and those would be included. The next element in the product resources menu are product attribute definitions. Much like interchange targets, you'll see the pattern of a different Evokat name versus a public name, but there's also an associated PADB part attribute value here. When you create an attribute in Premier, you have the option of associating it with a PADB ID or not. Some receivers require PADB values, others do not want them, so you can create your attributes with those values or not. And also when you generate a PIES file, you can opt into including those or not. The Evokat name is what you will see within the system. Public name is what goes out for the value if it does not have a PADB ID. And then if you do link it to a PADB ID, then this ID number is included in the PIES file. Also, just like interchange targets, you have the option of setting an attribute to be internal only. Special case situation where you might need to do that as opposed to using a custom element, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if for some reason you need to toggle a value on or off for a given file, you can do that with this internal only flag. Creating a product attribute definition works very similar to an interchange target in that you define your own internal display name, public display name, link it up to an ID if that is desired. But you also have the ability to define a list of values. And clicking on the little help icon here shows that a list of values needs to be separated as a pipe delimited file. The program will remove any leading or trailing spaces in the values that get saved. So if you do want to parse those out a little bit, you can, but it's a pipe delimited value. You can also define a unit of measure and language code for each of these attribute definitions. Further down, you can identify that this attribute should include multiple values. That's a newer function within the PIES XML standard. It is a way to communicate items that have multiple components, let's say a screwdriver set or something like that. You may indicate the different lengths or sizes within a particular kit. And then help text is information that will come up as you're authoring. It stays within the system, but it's just to help your own authors know which element is which. And if there's any kind of reference or guide information, you can direct them to that as well. Other options include the move, just like on interchange targets. But once we've defined one of these product attribute definitions, if we click the little eye icon, it takes us to the detail of that, and we have some additional options here. We can set a part terminology or target this part type to a part terminology if we want. So I can look through my list of defined part types, and if I set some values there, then every time I go to an item that uses that part type, it will essentially prompt me for that. It'll kind of give me a blank saying that this is an attribute that you want there. And you can also target that to a particular brand. This says include only for brand, but this has to do with the creation of those attributes automatically. So when you go to an item, if you have a part terminology defined, by default it'll come up as a universal branded item. But if you have something included only for a brand, then it would be targeted to just that brand. This can be a little bit confusing to talk about. Maybe something you just kind of need to walk through and try a couple. And we're, of course, here to help explain any of that as you go. The last two elements in the product resources menu we won't spend a lot of time on because they're not used very heavily. A custom element functions very similar to a product attribute. The only definition is it will never be considered as a product attribute within a file. So if you have internal values you're trying to track, an Amazon ASIN number, some other kind of identifier back to your own system, you can create as many different custom elements as you want, and then they will be included in custom reports that you have to request. The last element in the product resources section deals with hazardous material profiles. A hazardous material definition is some data that goes along with your package element within a PIS file to communicate special handling rules depending on how the product is being transported. This element is very rarely used in our experience, but if you do need to communicate special handling, different transport methods, all kinds of things like that, you can use this form to create a single definition of what that hazardous material should be, and then link that to your packages. So within each package, you don't have to define each of these values again and again. That covers the functions within the product menu. I hope you found this video to be helpful. If there's any elements that need additional clarification, or if you'd just like to walk through it with us, please reach out and we're more than happy to walk through it with you. Thank you.